And also a short question and answer session will be held at the end. So if anybody would like to ask any questions, just pop them into the Q&A tab that is at the bottom of your screen. The next slide there, please. So just very introduction, my name's Phil McCarn. I'm the head of governance here at Goodwill. And joining us today, we've got William Whittaker, who is a director at WA Management, who will be covering the topic of health and safety with us. So next slide there, please. Just as a bit of a background of Goodwill, we were founded by Annika Goodwill, who is a Swedish national. We were founded back in 1997 with the vision of creating a one centralized source of information for overseas companies who wish to set up in the UK. Today, we've helped more than 2,000 businesses set up in the UK. We have a team of about 50 members of staff at present, based between our Warwick and our London offices. We're still very, very strongly connected to the Swedish market, with around 50% of our business coming from our Swedish partnership. And next slide there, please. So we provide all the necessary essential businesses for companies looking to enter the UK and, more importantly, scale in the UK, covering across 5 main departments. So that is our corporate governance, finance, human resources, payroll, and virtual offices service. We pride ourselves in being able to do 95% of the things you need to set up in the UK. Some key areas that we don't have coverage on is audit, anything legal based. By legal based, I mean SRA regulated, and recruitment. But we do have partners that we can strongly recommend for these areas and many other areas, including our friends at WA Management. So I will hand over to William now to cover the main areas in the presentation.
Thank you, Phil. Thank you. Welcome, everybody. We've got health and safety to go through today, and I just want to give you a breadth of what health and safety is about in the UK and how we can help you. But to do that, first of all, we need to understand why we have quite a regulated industry for health and safety in the UK and what the implications of that are and how we promote management of that. And really the contents, we'll go through a few health and safety principles and some statistics to show what the UK government would say show that the health and safety principles are working. We'll just touch on lightly the law and director responsibilities. That's company house directors, not director in name, but directors have responsibility named at company's house. We'll touch on very lightly hazards and risk assessments, which are the principles that underlie the regulations and controls, and then finally how leadership within an organization can ensure that the culture of the business through its policy and procedures manage and monitor health and safety. Any questions as you go, pop them in the chat. I'll rely on Phil to give me a little nudge if there's some pertinent questions at the right time. Otherwise, we'll try and answer as many at the end as possible. So, UK law and director responsibilities. Principally, the health and safety in the UK are based on 3 main principles. The moral duty of the employer and employees to each other to do the right thing. This is underlined by financial moral status. And what we mean by that very easily is that safety should not come before profits. And finally, the legal framework that underpins those 2 things. And if you have the right, in an old adage, moral compass to ensure that you set up your business and treat your staff well and respect them as they should be, then health and safety should come in principle very easily. There's some other principles that we have that people often forget when they're directors in the UK. There is a director holds responsibility and what we call accountability in UK law. And very simply, a director can very much delegate responsibility for an area. They can delegate health and safety, they could delegate operations, they could delegate finance, but they cannot delegate accountability in the eyes of the law. So as a director, you've got to make sure that you're fulfilling your legal responsibilities, because if you're not, accountability falls on you automatically. There's also a principle in health and safety called reasonably practical. Okay, and this is a very tried and tested and very good way that health and safety manages itself. And this is where we balance cost and risk. And this is the argument between a small business that says, oh, I can't afford to do that, or that I don't have the resources to do that, versus a larger organization that does. So we have cost and risk that's balanced, and we put cost as money, time and trouble and effort to do something, and the risk is how likely it is to happen times the severity. And we'll go through that, how you assess risk and document a risk assessment a little bit later in the presentation. But there is a balance. So what's reasonable for one larger organization may not be reasonable for a smaller organization. And so why do we do all this, and why is it in place? Well, managing risk in that way, likelihood and severity, means that you can look at certain industries and decide whether controls are needed more than others. And if you have a quick look at this statistics for the latest statistics from the HSE that give us our industries and which are the most dangerous, and you can see that agriculture, forestry, fishing, and construction are way out in front. Those two industries are what we call high-risk industries, where if you're down right at the bottom, professional sitting in an office as an accountant or a lawyer in their offices, they tend to have far less. And this is the number of non-fatal injuries in the workplace. This is time that have been reported. So these are significant broken legs, arms, whatever. Since the 1900s, the UK government's kept statistics of deaths in the workplace. And this is from 1900 through to 2022, 2023. You can see a little dip to the left of 1980, which is when the 1974 Act came in place. And by and large, the decrease since Industrial Revolution has continued. And in recent years has actually plateaued. You can see since the regulations came in 1974, the Act, Health and Safety Work Act 1974, we've dropped from roughly around 500 down to 130 workplace fatal injuries. If we compare this to work-related fatal injuries in 2018 from the statistics we have across the EU, you will see that the United Kingdom, well, Norway's at the bottom, but United Kingdom and Germany and Ireland are the main economies there that are in the bottom half. They have very similar strategies. In fact, in 1992, the Maastricht Treaty brought in very similar regulations across the EU, but they've been differently interpreted and implemented. So not all countries have what we call the HSE, the Health and Safety Executive, who are the police of the of health and safety in the UK. And you can see that somewhere like France, you're almost 4 times more likely to have a fatal injury in the workplace than you would in Germany or the United Kingdom. So it's quite varying outcomes. And then when we talk about health, and health is often forgotten because health takes a long term, it's not an instant injury. Ill health is things like you develop occupational asthma from dust in the workplace, or you have hearing loss from noise in the workplace. These are quite common in high-risk industries like mining or quarrying or manufacturing, where factories don't have the right controls and they have a long-term health effect on the staff. It's not something that happens as a result of an instant injury. It's the work environment, and that environment has a long-term health effect. I'll let you, when you receive the presentation, see this in a little bit more detail. This is the headlines of 2023. And the one I'll draw your attention to are the two on the top right there. You've got 13.1 billion is the annual cost of new cases of work-related ill health in the UK. And the cost of workplace injuries in 21-22 cost 7.7 billion to the economy. This is significant a number, and you saw how low the UK was on the reported injuries. So in other economies, this will be far higher. And then bottom left, you've got the number of working days lost due to work-related ill health and non-fatal workplace injuries being 35.2 million, which is a significant burden on the economy and the cost line of any business if they incur that. So what's this act that I've spoken about? I've spoken about the Health and Safety at Work Act 1974. And this was a groundbreaking act. It brought in formalisation of health and safety across all industries. Before this, the UK had something called the Factories Act, which literally just looked after manufacturing. There was an acceptance that health and safety had to be across all industries. So the Health and Safety at Work Act 1974 came on, and it was based on common law principles of duty of care around that moral, legal, and financial responsibilities. It replaced all old legislation, and it brought in the HSE, the Health and Safety Executive. They are the enforcement body for health and safety. And in fact, apart from excise and duty officers, they have the most authority in the UK, far more than the police. They can come in without needing a warrant to your workplace. You can't restrict them into your workplace. They can request any documentation they want, and you have to provide it. The officer that's investigating you or visits you also prosecutes you. So the inspectors are also legal counsel. So they're extremely well versed. They usually come from experience in industry and then develop into the HSE. And the idea with the Health and Safety at Work Act was it empowered everyone, it protected everyone, and importantly for this, it meant that everyone has responsibility from a health and safety perspective. It's not about individual employer or employees. Everyone has responsibility. And it also allowed for new enabling legislation. So what we have underneath the Health and Safety at Work Act 1974 is a number of regulations that then bring in enforcement. And the whole principle very set out in the Health and Safety at Work Act, it shall be the duty of every employer to ensure, so far as really practical, the health and safety of welfare at work for all employees. And it's that reasonably practical that I spoke about earlier, this balance of risk versus cost, time, trouble, and effort versus severity and likelihood. And depending on your industry, depends on what is reasonably practical. So the employer has some duties very specifically set out, which is around making sure all the plant and processes that you follow are safe and maintained. And simple things like making sure that equipment that you buy is CE marked is really a very simple way of fulfilling that requirement. Ensuring safe and absence of risk to health in connection with use, handling, storage, transport, and articles and substances, to making sure that when you use or store anything or any product that you're moving around, that you use the right equipment to do so. Very simply, you don't move. It's not productive to get a horde of staff to move boxes when a forklift truck could do it. The third one was to make sure information, instruction, and training and supervision with regards to health and safety. And this is fulfilled by ensuring people are trained in the job that they do and they understand the risks and the controls that are implemented. You provide a place of work that's safe and without risk of access, means of access and egress. And the common one that we would see going around workplaces is ensuring that fire exits aren't blocked by stored boxes and such like. And the final one, we're making sure the working environment is safe and free from health risks with adequate facilities and arrangements. So very simply, that we make sure that dust and noise and vibration is minimized for the long-term health of those staff, but also that welfare facilities, that's toilets, changing rooms, kitchens are available, and running hot water is a basic requirement for washing your hands, for example. So there's some very basic principles for the employer's duties. And whilst you've got the employer's duty, they also make sure that the employee, whilst at work, take reasonable care for themselves and others. They do what they are told to do when they're undertaking their work. They fulfill their statutory provision to cooperate with the employer to make sure that they fulfill those duties. And they don't recklessly or interfere or misuse anything in the interest of health and safety or welfare. Sounds quite simple, common sense, if you like, but it's amazing how many times those 5 for the employer and 3 for the employee are forgotten. And then, as I've mentioned before, we've got the health and safety executive, but they're not the only people who have enforcement authorities under the Health and Safety at Work Act. We have the councils through the environmental agencies or environmental health in the local council. They have the same enforcement authorities. It's just where they divide up who's responsible for certain areas. So they do that on a risk basis. So there may be an industrial estate at a town or a city, and due to the high risk nature of the factories that are on it, the HSE takes control of that through the industrial sense. But if it's only a commercial offices, factories, maybe some kitchens, some sandwich shops, then the local authority take responsibility for that commercial. But they always defer to the HSE. The HSE have overall control. And some of these same powers have been extended over time to the fire service, who have the same enforcement powers now, and also the Environmental Agency have also, over time in recent years, been given those powers. And it's about being prosecuted, can also prosecute the individual, not just the company. So if you're a named director and you are seen as accountable and you individually haven't seen to have fulfilled your roles and responsibilities, then these people, these local authority, HSE, the fire service or the environmental agency have the ability to prosecute individual directors as well as the company. If the HSE are undertaking investigations in the UK, they have an ability to do fee for intervention. That's where they can identify issues in the business when they do an inspection, and they can then recover the cost of them ensuring that those health and safety defects are corrected by charging fee for intervention. I think it was £140 an hour. At the £144 an hour at the last look. And the idea here is that they can ensure, without using their severe improvement notice and prohibition notice they could issue, they can then make sure that they put right the wrong that they've found quickly and more efficiently. And just under the Legal Aid Sentencing and Punishing Offenders Act 2012, companies are not able to recover legal costs when acquitted if the HSE is found to be wrong. So it's very important that the HSE could bark up the wrong tree, cost you some legal costs and you win in court, but the HSE, your legal costs can't be brought back from the HSE if they've found wrong. In the early zeros, we had what's called Corporate Manslaughter Act come into the UK law as a punishment, as well as another way of using a stick to ensure companies fulfill their requirements. And this was very much around making sure that businesses that were seen to be negligent, incompetent, if you like, they were able to be investigated for corporate manslaughter. So the individual directors can face imprisonment if they're found that their gross breach of duty resulted in death in the workplace. So there's unlimited fines for the business, usually based on a percentage of turnover, not profit, for corporate manslaughter. And they're actually they're not limited. The judge can decide unlimited fine on that. They can also put publicity orders, so you'd have to advertise that you've done wrong, potentially. We haven't seen that one used so much, but we've definitely seen larger fines for bigger businesses because it's based on its percentage turnover. And in assessing the level of fine, the courts take into account the aggravating factors, the mitigating factors, and the financial position of the business. If they're seen to be year-on-year profit-making with a large turnover, they will go for a large fine. Under Health and Safety at Work Act, companies can be charged for a failure to ensure so far as reasonably practicable the safety of employees. And this is a limited fine and 12 months imprisonment in the magistrate court, or unlimited fine and 2 years imprisonment from a Crown court. So this is where the corporate manslaughter came in, because it was seen very much that 2 years, if there was a death in the workplace, this wasn't seen to be sufficient. Also under Section 37 of the Health and Safety at Work Act, where an offence is committed with consent or connivance or is attributed to neglect by a director or similar officer, they can be prosecuted personally, which has fines and imprisonment. And you cannot avoid charge of neglect by claiming ignorance of circumstances. This is what we call incompetence. So you can't claim you didn't know what you didn't know because you didn't know, so to speak. It's your job as a director to understand all your responsibilities and take action to mitigate them. And ultimately, if under Section 37 you are prosecuted, you face director's disqualification under the Disqualification Act 1986, and power exercised at discretion of the court for that. What you tend to find is, what we've seen in the past, is that people are suspended rather than fully disqualified. So that's the director's responsibilities and what the penalties are if health and safety isn't implemented sufficiently, particularly in high risk industries. But we've got all of these, and this is only a fraction of the secondary legislation. What we have is regulations that sit below the Health and Safety at Work Act. And regulations are specific to specific hazards. So here we've got manual handling, we've got accident reporting, we've got specific signs that should be used, you've got workplace, work equipment and maintenance, and you've got management, how to manage health and safety in the workplace. There's many different ones here, I won't go through them all. But usually where there's a significant hazard that needs controlling, these regulations are put in place, and a specific, very typically, a specific risk assessment on those hazards needs to be undertaken. So what's a risk assessment? Very simply, the Health and Safety at Work Act 1974 sets out that a risk assessment should be done, and the management regulation says that you must carry out a risk assessment that's suitable and sufficient. So what's a hazard? A hazard is very simply something with the potential to cause harm and cause what we call a hazardous event or an accident. And there's many different hazards that have specific regulations. And these hazards are just an example here, such as hand tools, electricity, noise, vibration, manual handling. Some of those you've heard in your industry, some of them you won't have. So how do we calculate risk? Well, very simply, we see a hazard at this point, a pothole. If it's on the high street in front of a busy shop, that's a high likelihood, and the consequence is dependent on the outcome of someone tripping up it. So if it's in the back alley, low chance. On the high street, high chance. Injury, no injury is low. Broken ankle would be high. So very much there going through the principle of, do you break something or break your ankle? And the same goes if you're in a warehouse. And what we do is we have the consequence times the likelihood. And within that, you can see in that matrix how we move from low likelihood to high consequence would give you 5 out of 25, and the same with low consequence and high likelihood. But as you move into the upper echelons, it's unacceptable. The work should be stopped and improvements and different controls put in place. And what we have is what we call, when we talk about controls, the hierarchy of controls. So what's the most effective down to the least effective. So least effective is wearing your high vis, very simply at the bottom. Your most effective is eliminating it, removing the physical hazard. We've all seen water window cleaners using up a ladder, very high risk. Going up a ladder at height, you could fall, but by using a pole with water and a spongey, and you can stand at the base of the building, you've eliminated that hazard, and that's the best way to do it. The other one is to substitute, replace the hazard. Others are engineering controls, such as guarding. We've all got a microwave at home. When you open the guarding, the door, it stops. That's what we call an engineering control. And then we've got administrative controls, which is safe systems of work, a process that you follow. Any questions at that stage? Have we got anything in there, Phil? Are we okay?
Yes, thanks very much for that, William. We do have one question that has come in. I suppose this is in general to everything you've been discussed in the presentation. How do you approach health and safety when your staff are working from home? So essentially, there's no office; it's the kind of the work from home principle.
Yeah, it's a really good question. So you're responsible for them when they're working at home, and you've got to assess that they've got principally got a good setup, Phil. You've got to make sure that that you've assessed how they're working and how they're set up to work. Because if they're sat on the kitchen table and a kitchen chair, it's not a workplace desk, and therefore there's going to be a long-term health effect if they're not working at a proper desk and table. So whether the company pays for that, provides an allowance, or they expect the employee to provide that setup, that's one for the company to decide with through a risk assessment. But the responsibility sits with the company to make sure they've got the right workplace. And just on that, it's probably worth also making sure that there's controls in place for lone working.
Mm.
Both are the biggest hazards if people are working from home.
And when you mention lone working, are you speaking from a kind of a mental health perspective, or in what kind of way are you speaking?
That's a great question. Yeah, so there is that check-in time that you need to make sure that that there's mental health is considered, but also lone working from a protection. So if that person going out to a different workplace and going home again, going and visiting a customer, for example, it's making sure that they've got back from doing that workplace job safely and safely and back at work. And there's loads of different softwares now to help with that. It's not about people. The problem is employees often think that you're sort of watching, time checking, making sure they're doing their job, but really it's about making sure that they're safe.
And I suppose just to follow up on that one, we've got a couple of minutes. And when on the same area, when staff are working from home and from obviously, if you're in an office, the company would have requirements for insurance for their staff, whether that, whatever liability insurance that is. How does that apply when offices are based in individual homes? Is the onus on the company or is it the onus on the staff for that?
No, yeah. So it's a bit like an employee driving their car for work. It's up to the employee to have the right insurances if their insurance covers them to be in the house all day. That's not the employer. The employer could provide that advice to help them understand that. So there is a responsibility by the employer to help the employee make sure they're set up correctly.
Perfect. We've got no more questions, William. So I think unless anybody's got a quick last minute question, which I don't think we have, I think that is everything for today, William. Thank you very much for your time. As always, it is gratefully appreciated.
No, thank you.
And just to reassess to everybody on the meeting that the slides, etc., will be shared after this call and also published on our website. And if you've got any questions that come up after this call, just pop to the usual channels and we'll take it from there. Thank you very much, everybody.